Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
From her rich and fertile valleys to the shores of her icy seas, from her fields and farms and shellfish beds and her many nurseries, for the finest of her flavor, for the freshest by far, choose the things Alaskans bring to the market where you are. Products that we're proud to call our own, and it's all Alaska grown.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this 29th of June, and I would love to have Hobo Jim do a weather intro for Alaska Weather. What do you think? Send him a note and tell him he needs to sing us an Alaska weather song. Weather.gov/Alaska is still your place to go to get 24-hour weather information, and if you go to weather.gov/Anchorage/Fairbanks or /Juneau, you'll get your local weather information even more localized for your part of Alaska. The weather info line is still open at 800-472-0391. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube, of course. And if you check on Facebook now, we're already talking about a weather event that's coming to South Central as we head into what could be an extended holiday weekend for you. And while you're at it, take a look at some of our new websites, w2.weather.gov/AFC, w2.weather.gov/AFG, and /AJK. You don't want to bookmark these just yet. These are the test or beta sites where we are trying some new things and giving you a preview of how your weather is going to look online here after July 6th. So go try it out, see if you can break it, see if something doesn't work quite the way you need it to, and then let us know so we can fix it. And on July 6th, we're going to flip those over to the websites that you normally use. You're going to have to reset your bookmarks, and some of the things might not work exactly the same way. So find your stuff, go see how it works, and then after July 6th, reset your tools there on your desktop or on your phone, and you'll have some really neat features I think that most people will enjoy. So try it out, let us know what you think. Here's a look at what's going on first. Fire danger is creeping up again for areas around the Seward Peninsula, the Kobuk, and the middle Yukon valleys. You can start to see a few more drier spots shaping up there, especially out across the upper Yukon Valley as well in the Yukon Flats. Fire danger is creeping up there for the Copper River Basin as well as for the Matanuska and Susitna Valleys, even the Anchorage Bowl, parts of Bristol Bay, and the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta regions, and Haines is still on the map with high fire danger there. Here's the good news. Things are beginning to change and point toward a wave of wet weather coming out of the continental parts of Canada and meeting up with rich moisture across the south central and southwestern parts of Alaska. Now, as far as really significant rains go, chances are it's going to be from the Alaska Range and southward. But there is going to be some of that bleeding over into the Alaska Range and points northward. So let's take a look at the satellite picture. First, we have our persistent low across the Gulf of Alaska. It's pushing moisture up across southeast. Didn't see a whole lot of rainfall there for you today, but you can see it's fairly close to the outer coast. A lot of dry air across the northern Gulf and the western Gulf, as well as the Bering Sea, where high pressure is large and in charge, holding back a frontal boundary that's pretty clear right here. There's a lot of moisture, a lot of unsettled weather to the west and over the chain, and out across the west coast, well, we start to get into more of that continental air that's helping the clouds to bubble up in the afternoon and create showers and thunderstorms, and that's what you're seeing here. There's plenty of dry air across the Seward Peninsula, Norton Sound, Kotzebue Sound, and then you get up to the Brooks Range where we still have a frontal boundary trying to drop southward, but it's just not strong enough to really make a big push southward with that cooler air. Watch the loop one more time, and if you keep careful watch of what's going on here across the Yukon and British Columbia, this surge of moisture is getting a little bit of extra help from a disturbance in the upper atmosphere. This is flowing toward Alaska, and as it rotates to the west, it's going to stir up more rainfall across south central, especially areas north of the Anchorage Bowl as we go into Thursday afternoon and evening and on into Friday, and that could bring up some of our river levels. I'm going to show you something a little different than I normally bring to the weather show each day. This is quantitative precipitation forecasting. What does that mean? How much is it going to rain in 6 hours? So each one of these images is a 6-hour frame, and I want you to watch for the dark greens to the blues here. This is a ½ inch right here for the dark green, a color like this. This is about 1 inch of rain in 6 hours, remember. And then if you see any purples or reds, that's kind of bad news. That's pretty heavy rain. So I don't think we're going to get that far, but watch for the deep greens and the blues. And that's a 6-hour time period. This is going to start tonight at 10 o'clock. And watch what happens as that moisture comes out of Canada and rotates around through south central. Did you see a couple frames there where we saw a little bit of the blue? There are going to be some heavier rain pockets there, especially tomorrow night, right around south central Alaska and into the western Alaska range. Here's that loop one more time. And again, this goes kind of quickly, I'll admit, but look at the Alaska range here. This is where a lot of that's going to go. So if you're, say, heading to Talkeetna or northward or any of the cabins there out across some of the smaller streams that feed into the Susitna River, pay close attention to the weather tomorrow. And if you're heading that way, driving, hiking, camping, fishing, this is the kind of weather that you really need to watch. We're also going to see thunder and lightning as this wave moves through, and there's Thursday night and on into Friday. As that happens again, that also presents an additional risk if you're going to be out and about. This is Thursday and into Friday. There may be some other waves that follow this as we head into the weekend, so we're watching that very closely. There are no flood warnings, watches, or advisories out at this time, but there certainly could be. Make sure you have a way to receive those weather alerts and messages no matter where you're going in your part of Alaska. Here's a look at today's weather. High pressure's up across the Arctic coast at 1,018 millibars. There's a front across the Brooks Range, and that's holding back the bulk of that cool air. It's trying to drop southward, but we have a wealth of warmer and even more unstable air across most of the interior and the west. For southeast, it's been a fairly dry day, but rain's been working northward at around Ketchikan and Annette and up toward the outer coast around Sitka. Low pressure is responsible for that, and it's bringing up that moisture from southeast. It's also working with high pressure across British Columbia and Yukon to feed that back into the interior. High pressure is also strong enough to hold back the front there across the Bering, and you can see that sitting in pretty much the same place it was yesterday. Underneath that, periods of rain and drizzle. And there's going to be a quarter of slightly wetter air that's just ahead of that dying boundary out across the western Bering, and that could reach into Nikolsky, Unalaska, and Dutch Harbor, maybe as far east as Unumak and probably Akatana and toward probably the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula. East of that, you'll run into a better chance of fog, and even tonight there could be showers and thunderstorms still going as we head into the evening hours as some of that moisture is creeping in. And the instability or the rising air left over from the heating of today is still with us in the late summer days. Here's a look at southeast, and you're watching for periods of showers tonight with low pressure sitting down south. There's also a surge of warmer and wetter air trying to lift northward on the west side of a ridge of high pressure sitting around the Pacific Northwest. Watch what happens tomorrow. That wave comes out of Canada and reinforces a much wetter pattern that will pick up during the day. Many of our mountain passes will probably be VFR in the morning, but that could change fairly quickly. So if you're going and expect you're going to get back, make sure you're watching the weather because things could change and go down fairly quickly during the afternoon if you're not planning ahead. Periods of heavier rainfall will be possible, especially near the mountains there and especially north of Anchorage, but even south of that we're going to see significant rainfall, and that could change some of the river levels on the Kenai as well as Kenai Lake, and we're watching that glacial dam lake around Ski Lake as well. So a lot going on and a lot that could change as you go out and perhaps leave the comfort of your home or just fly out to your normal fishing spot. Things could change during the daytime tomorrow, not to mention through the remainder of the weekend. Showers and thunderstorms could find their way up toward Arctic Village and southward later tomorrow afternoon, and rain will likely set into southeast. Out across the west, well, that boundary hasn't moved very much, but high pressure has. It's moving just north of St. Lawrence Island at 1,019 millibars and continues moving westward south of the Gulf of Anadyr for Friday. That makes more room for more rain across more places in southwestern Alaska, across the interior and all the way up to Eagle, southward toward Northway into Prince William Sound. And once again, some of that could be heavy at times. Southeast, a wave of low pressure is moving up through the Dixon Entrance, and as that happens, that should force more of that warmer, wetter air further northward into northern and central parts of southeast as we get your weekend started as well. Out across the central and eastern chain, periods of rainfall will be seen there, but you'll notice that frontal boundary now has really shifted off to the west, so changes are happening out in the Bering as we head into the weekend. Here's a look at temperatures today. 50s and 60s were the rule for most parts of the Panhandle. 57 in Sitka, lower to mid 60s from Petersburg down toward Ketchikan and Annette at 3 o'clock. Hyder was 72. That's about what we saw in the capital city, and lower 70s were seen around Skagway and Haines as well, 61 in Yakutat, 50s and 60s for most of the Prince William Sound region. Valdez was 64, 70 at 3 o'clock in Anchorage. Talkeetna was 72, 74 in Fairbanks, almost 80 in Eagle, and even warmer as you head up toward Birch Creek. 77 around the Yukon Flats and Fort Yukon itself, 72 for Arctic Village, 70 for AKwx Pass. And there's that cooler air. Remember the frontal boundary that was lingering right here? Well, there's all the cool air it was trying to push in. It just couldn't get up the hill. 30s and 40s there. Remember, cool air is more dense than warmer air and wants to sink to its lowest possible place, just like pouring water into a bowl. That's exactly what the cold air is doing, and it just can't come up over the lip of the glass. 50s and 60s are seen for Kotzebue Sound, 52 in Nome, upper 40s for St. Lawrence Island. And for most of the YK Delta, it was 60s, 70s for even more interior locations like Bethel at 73, McGrath was 74. Southwestern Bristol Bay just shy of 70 degrees. I bet a number of places and villages made it warmer than that today. 55 in St. Paul, 52 for Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, and it was 47 in Shemya. Overnight low temperatures stay in the 40s and 50s, but the lower terrain, some places could stay almost at 60 degrees overnight. The North Slope in the low 30s, close to freezing, 47 in Nome, 50 for Kodiak. Upper 40s for Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, southeast in the lower to mid 50s, and south central close to 50 degrees. Highs tomorrow in the upper 50s and lower 60s. Remember, clouds and rain will be the rule. Close to 80 degrees around the Fort Yukon region, as well as areas close to Fairbanks and North Pole, west toward Tanana and southwest toward the Bethel and Yukon Kuskokwim Delta region. Lower to mid 70s seen there. 62 in Nome, 47 in Barrow, with Unalaska and Dutch Harbor at 52, St. Paul 50 degrees, and southeast close to 60 in many locations. Flying weather is going to change tomorrow, especially around south central. You'll see IFR in the west and off the Chukchi coast into Kotzebue Sound and east of Kodiak, and watch what happens as we go. You'll see more and more areas of IFR branching out in the afternoon. This will probably expand by the evening hours, and showers and thunderstorms should be expected. Watch for MVFR across northern parts of southeast, Prince William Sound, the Kenai Peninsula, Kodiak Island, the Alaska Peninsula, St. Paul, northward towards St. Lawrence Island, and in through the Bering Strait. Here's your past conditions. Watch for changes here as well. AKwx VFR, watch for storms to develop in the afternoon. Adigan Pass, also expecting VFR throughout the day. These are not going to be the problem spots tomorrow. We'll see changes gradually creeping into Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, going VFR for most of the day. Rainy Pass will see a change toward MVFR as we go through the afternoon. Windy Pass could drop to IFR by the afternoon with rain and thunder there. Isabel, IFR conditions and poor visibility expected. Mentasta right now we're expecting VFR, but watch for some MVFR updates there, I would say, by mid-afternoon. So there is a chance that that could change. And as we get into Tanita Pass, we also expect that to lean over toward IFR conditions with showers and storms possible, low ceilings and low visibility. And Portage Pass expected to drop to MVFR. That's probably not much of a surprise to frequent aviators there. And Chilkoot and White Pass, as you saw, holding at MVFR through most of the day. Freezing levels, well, with the low pressure system locked in the Gulf of Alaska, 6,000 feet, that's not much of a surprise. It's collected a wealth of cool air, but it is spreading out and mixing around a little bit more, so we may see that change here in the next couple days. In the meantime, you can see the heat that's being pumped into the interior from western parts of Yukon and British Columbia. Freezing levels there as high as 10,000 feet, and the North Slope there as low as 8,000 feet. And some of that heat's already working its way out into the eastern Bering at about 8,000 feet as well. Icing potential is pretty hit and miss so far. This may change by late afternoon and certainly for Friday, but right now it's pretty high up there around the eastern part of Prince William Sound and Copper River Basin, above 10,000 feet, south of most of the Panhandle above 8,000 feet, and along that frontal boundary out in the Bering, that's holding around 9,000 to 10,000 feet and higher. Like to isolate moderate as possible there. Here's our jet stream, and the fast-moving river of air at about 30,000 feet or higher is really steering most of the weather activity south of Alaska. So what do we have? We've got the leftovers, and the steering current from east to west coming out of continental Canada is working that moisture across south central, kind of giving that a little bit of an extra boost when it flies over it. So it gives it a little more lift, and the storm clouds have a little bit better chance of yielding heavier rainfall. At 9,000 feet, and that flow is supported, it's pretty light, 5 to 10 knots or so. Light winds across southeast at about 10 to 15. Strongest winds are out across the southern Bering at about 30 to 35, with westerlies across the North Slope. At 3,000 feet, wind speeds are very light across most parts of the interior. Again, northerlies coming out of Cook Inlet, 5 to 10 knots. Southeasterlies for southeast Alaska, and a gentle westerly flow coming into the central and western chain about 10 to 25. Watching for turbulence. Always out across the eastern chain and south of the Alaska Peninsula. Watch for a few thunderstorms across the interior, of course, and across the Beaufort Seacoast. Some light to isolated moderate chop is possible. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
The Coxsackie Bay Laboratory, which is operated by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the University of Alaska Fairbanks, is a unique marine research and teaching laboratory that is dedicated to excellence in marine science. The laboratory is currently involved in several research projects. One of those projects is called Hydropalooza, which has received a lot of attention on both a local and national level. Here to talk about this important project are the directors of the laboratory, Chris Holderried and David Christie. Welcome to the studio, guys.
Thanks, Jim.
What is Hydropalooza, Chris?
Well, Hydropalooza fundamentally is a 2-year seafloor coastline mapping project for Kachemak Bay. And it's providing high resolution, high spatial resolution, very detailed maps of both the sea bottom and the coastline to support a whole variety of different purposes. It basically will tell us the shape of the bay and the coast as well as what's on the bottom. But more than just mapping, it's really working with a whole variety of partners, both within the state and outside the state, on how do we, NOAA, get more information, better benefits about all this data that we collect primarily for navigation purposes. We do it to make nautical charts and to ensure safe navigation, but it can also be used for resource management, for local development, and for emergency response.
Why is this being done in Alaska?
Well, it's an interesting question because primarily that they're within Kachemak Bay. It was a natural place to do this because we have both the NOAA Coxsackie Bay Laboratory and the Kachemak Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve. So we've got kind of the built-in partnerships and collaborations to make this work well. But also 40% of NOAA's mapping effort nationwide is actually done in Alaska. So it's a natural place to do this.
Oh, that's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What collaborations support this project?
Well, this is one of these projects that can't be done without a lot of partners. From the national perspective, we've got 2 NOAA ships coming in, the NOAA ship Fairweather and the NOAA ship Rainier. Came in last summer in 2008, and they'll be coming back in 2009. NOAA Cessna Citation Aircraft is doing the shoreline mapping, and we're working with many offices within our Office of Coast Survey and National Geodetic Service, as well as the Coastal Ocean Science part of the National Ocean Service. Within the state, we're working with Alaska Department of Fish and Game, as well as the Kachemak Bay Research Reserve, and Department of Natural Resources, other state organizations that would be interested in this kind of information. Mm-hmm. And then locally, we're doing a lot with local marine conservation and education groups.
So who benefits from Hydropalooza?
In a general way, everybody who lives or works and plays on or around the bay benefits. At a management level, coastal planners can use the information to do a much better job of what they have to do. People who manage fisheries or manage marine navigation will benefit from having more accurate maps. And people who fish for subsistence, for sport or commercially will also benefit from having better maps to work from. From a scientific level, the mapping is just the start. It tells us the shape of the bay, so already we understand much more about the details of how the bay is constructed, and that enables us to go on, understand how the tides and currents work better on more detail, and then how those things affect plankton, crab larvae, things like that moving through the bay, how they affect the fresh water that floods into the bay from the glaciers at certain times of the year, and how sediments are redistributed around the bay.
Can you describe some of the early findings from the Hydropalooza research?
Yeah, well, the new mapping systems give us a much more high-definition image than we've ever had before, so we can actually, even from the very earliest maps, we can start to see some things on the seafloor. Some of the more exciting things we've seen is right off the end of Homer Spit, there's a landslide. We don't know yet whether this is was formed during the 1964 earthquake or whether it's an active feature, but that's certainly something that we'll be wanting to look at very soon. Another interesting feature, there was a wreck discovered off the Homer Spit that was not well known before. Probably fishermen knew it was there, but we didn't. And another very interesting feature up near the head of the bay, there's an area in which there are some interesting circular structures, and these are things we call pockmarks. And The most likely thing these are is a place where something is coming out onto the seafloor. It could be groundwater, or even more interesting, it could be methane that's derived from the coal beds in the region. So methane is very interesting because if that's the case, it will be potentially supporting some very interesting life forms around where these vents. So it's another area of interest that we'll be getting into.
Well, this has got to be so exciting for both of you. I mean, when you're seeing these things revealed to you for the first time, I mean, what's your initial reaction when you see a shipwreck and you see, you know, these different terrain features that you've never even thought were there?
Well, one of the really fun things that happens is when we put these maps out for public outreach events and things like that, and it's amazing to see who hones in on what. So the fishermen will hone in on where they see potential fishing areas in the detail. The kids honed in on things like the wreck, and we had found a 150-foot high bedrock feature that hadn't been known about before. So this 150-foot, you know, huge rock or whatever it is, we don't know yet. You know, they jumped right on things like that. So it's exciting. Geologists see one part, you know, fisheries managers see something else. It's information that everyone can use.
So Chris, what happens next?
Well, we finished up the 2008 field work and from last summer, and we'll be starting the planning for the 2009 field season. So both the two ships, Fairweather and Rainier, will be coming back, as well as our aircraft in August of 2009. Concurrently, we're processing the data from the first field season, and so the shoreline mapping data is already available online through the NOAA Coastal Services Center, and the bathymetry data, the seafloor bottom data, will be available soon. But one of the things this will also serve as is a model for how NOAA does these kind of projects nationwide. It's called Integrated Ocean and Coastal Mapping, and the basic principle is we map once, but we use the information many times for many different benefits. So we'll be providing information on that kind of process too.
Great, that's wonderful. Thank you guys for coming into the studio today and talking about this wonderful project, Hydropalooza.
Thanks for giving us the chance to talk about it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks
and
so much.
I wish you the best.
Thanks.
And thank you for joining us here in Alaska Weather Facts. Until next time.
Thanks, Jim. Here's a quick check of today's sea ice edge. You can always get the latest at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice.php. The white areas, of course, are the higher concentrations of ice, and those are still lingering close to Point Barrow and just offshore of Wainwright. But there is some more open water now between Barrow and Prudhoe Bay and east toward Kaktovik. A lot of the blue shades aren't completely clear of ice, but the concentrations are significantly lower than they have been. And also from Wainwright down toward Point Lay, and of course the open water there in the dark blue is increasing as well from Point Hope into Kotzebue Sound and of course southward into the Bering Sea. It's sea ice free. Here's a look at southeast now, and winds for tomorrow will be generally light across the inner channels, anywhere from 10 to 15 knots with 2 to 3 foot seas. Across the outer coast, they'll be light in the north around Yakutat and point southward toward Cross Sound. 4 foot seas expected there, but notice the winds coming up now south of Sitka to the Dixon entrance, 25 knots with a 4 foot sea expected there. Here's a look at Friday, and as you'll notice, the winds are coming up a little bit more inside of Lynn Canal, up to 20 knots with a 4 foot sea. They'll switch around a little bit more into the central parts of the Panhandle, and then Clarence Straits coming up to 20 knots from the south and east with a 4 foot sea. Winds are also changing in the north. They're still fairly light there at 10 knots, but out of the north, 4 to 5 foot seas there, and a south and southeasterly wind will continue around 20 knots with 6 to 7 foot seas all across the coastal areas in the south. For south central across the north and western Gulf, wind speeds stay fairly light and somewhat variable throughout the day. Small seas and winds around 10 to 15 knots. Across Cook Inlet, a southerly flow is feeding in. That's going to help push more moisture northward toward the mountains and also add to the potential for heavier rainfall the further north you go from Anchorage. As you look at Friday, notice the winds are still pumping in from the south and southwest for most of the Cook Inlet region. Shelikof Strait looking at southwesterlies with 20 knots. Southerlies inside of Prince William Sound. Small seas and light winds, that's good there, but it could be raining pretty heavily at times around the mountains. Look for winds around 10 to 15 knots across the north and western Gulf and east of Kodiak Island. A southwesterly flow, 20 knots with a 4 foot sea. Inside Bristol Bay, light winds and small seas. Winds coming out of the southeast there at 15, and easterly flow a little bit further down the Bering Sea coast, and north and easterly winds for the Pacific coast with 4 to 5 foot seas there on Thursday. For Friday, easterlies will come through the Pacific areas, 15 to 20 knots with a 5 foot sea, and westerlies coming into Bristol Bay and down the coast at 20 to 25 3-foot seas inside of Bristol Bay on Friday. For the Aleutians, light and variable winds from most of the central and western chain, and easterly flow reaching through the eastern chain at 20 knots with 5-foot seas in the Bering Sea coast and 7-foot seas across the Pacific coast, with otherwise 4 to 5-foot seas from most of the rest of the Aleutians. For Friday, look for more of a south and westerly flow to push in across the central and eastern chain. 4-foot seas for the Bering Sea coast, 5 to 6-foot seas for the central and eastern chain along the Pacific coast. And out in the west, you'll see a little bit more of a variable flow becoming southwesterly with time as you get toward Kiska. 4 to 5-foot seas expected there on that 10 to 15 knot wind. For the west coast, north and easterly flow working north of Nunivak Island. Light easterlies on the south side of the island and into the Kuskokwim Delta. Look for an easterly flow coming through St. Paul and St. George at 20 knots with a 5-foot sea and 7-foot seas around the St. Matthew Island waters, with southeasterly flow reaching into St. Lawrence Island. A 15-knot wind there on Thursday. That becomes northerly as high pressure shifts a little bit further out to the west that drags the air down out of the Bering Strait. Look for that north and westerly flow coming into land around Cape Newenham and the Kuskokwim Delta. 15 to 20 knots there with a 3 to 4-foot sea and variable winds around St. Paul and St. George. Easterlies will move across the Beaufort Sea coast at 20 knots on Thursday. Northeasterlies from Point Barrow to Wainwright, and southwesterlies outside of Kotzebue Sound at 15 knots. That switches around to more of a northwesterly flow on Friday. Light winds moving offshore from Barrow down to Point Lay, and easterlies coming across the Beaufort Sea coast. 5-foot seas there around Kaktovik in the open seas. Recapping tonight's weather, it's about to get wet, and some of that rain could come down hard around parts of south central, especially from the Anchorage Bowl northward. Look for widely scattered showers and storms again, and rainfall will start to pick up in southeastern Alaska as well. Here's a look at Thursday. Thursday afternoon looks wetter than most days we've seen, some of it pretty heavy for the season as well. So be on your guard and be ready to get more weather information when you need it. For Friday, showers and thunderstorms continue.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
When shopping for your family's meals, do you know where you can find Alaska-grown products? Everywhere. They're available at your local grocery stores and farmers markets across the state. Alaska-grown products are fresher and more nutritious, and buying local helps grow our economy.
Coming up next on 360 North.